Yeah, the tight end position is creating mismatches. It's creating versatility, right? So you mentioned it. You throw a big slot out there. Well, we talk about the impact in the passing game and what that means maybe for the tight end position in Dynasty. What that really is doing as well is creating this insane advantage in the rushing attack.
Yes.
And so I've been leaning into the rushing attack is on its way back. This is a cyclical league. We are going to see some influx of rushing. What that looks like is going to be very different. We just talked about that as well. What is up, guys? Today on the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show, we'll be talking about the evolution of NFL offenses. The driving question this week: what offensive philosophy changes in the NFL are most impactful to dynasty roster construction? Jeff, hit me with it.
Yeah, breaking it down, the NFL right now is kind of separating into three different branches. You have the Shanahan West Coast outside zone run concepts that Jordan Rodriguez did a fantastic job for the Athletic, breaking that down in the play caller series and really looking at the offshoot. Sean McVay's part of that, Mike McDaniel in Miami's part of that. Then you go to Philadelphia, what they were able to do, bringing a lot of the RPO concepts, bringing a lot of the power run. Some of that stuff has bubbled up historically from, back in 49ers with Jim Harbaugh and Colin Kaepernick were doing some of that. And Shane Steichen was really able to bring that to Philadelphia with Jalen Hurts. And then you kind of have the Andy Reid offshoot, and I think we're lumping Brian Daboll, Andy Reid, Ken Dorsey a little bit into there, and kind of the direction that those offenses are heading. But where do you want to start? What do you want to break down within that?
So I think the main thing is that these three different offenses have certainly changed the way we look at dynasty roster construction from the standpoint. There are so many different ways that we can go. I mean, from the running backs discussion that we had last week, where, running backs do matter, but the Shanahan system has kind of highlighted ways where they don't. This spread concept, it's kind of filtering targets to, three different options in an offense. There are a ton of different ways that we can go with this week. I think one thing that you've always talked about as one of those, indicators of a new age of the NFL is the tight end position. Dalton Kincaid is one of those examples. Talk to me about Dalton Kincaid and what that kind of signals and what his draft selection signals to the rest of the NFL.
Yeah, and really part of that is what Travis Kelce has been able to bring to the league. And when you look at the the Chiefs last year, and you think about all the different wide receiver options the Chiefs have, they ran a lot of 12 personnel using Travis Kelce and using Noah Gray, using Jody Fortson a little bit, using Blake Bell just a little bit, and kind of moving Travis Kelce off the line, treating him as that big slot. And so because of that, they were able to have more physicality in the run game. They were able to do a little bit more in the short and underneath. And so Brian Daboll seeing that and Ken Dorsey seeing that, and I guarantee that they have had conversations between the two of them with their history and how close they are. We see Buffalo on draft day use a first-round pick to add Dalton Kincaid, to use him kind of as that Kelce in the offense, that mobile piece, that big slot, and to kind of move Dawson Knox as more of that traditional inline tight end. And what the Bills are doing, they're playing with Dawson Knox a little bit out of the backfield, and they're running some diamond sets in training camp. They're doing a lot of different things. And then you see the Giants as well, that trade for Darren Waller. And I think that while a lot of people are wrapped up in the depth that the Giants have at wide receiver, when you really look at it with the way Daniel Bellinger broke out last year and the physicality he brings to the position, bringing Darren Waller in as that big wide receiver, that big slot, that gives you that versatility. And so really what it is it allows teams to play spread, to force defenses into lighter sets while still having a very physical package that they can bring against defenses, and really kind of creating that conflict. And that's really what it's all about, creating conflicts and creating explosives.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up a really great point there at the end. I think, I mean, the whole point was good, but you brought up a really good point at the end where it's, all of these NFL defenses are the air raid, the passing attack. It's been this for the last half decade, and so defenses adjusted and they went out and they got bodies that could cover, receivers. They are building their defenses in nickel base nickel, which would be, five DBs on the field at one time. And so what you're now seeing is that, everything is cyclical. We talked about that a little bit on last week's show, but now the offenses have caught up to oh, can I put Daniel Bellinger out here to take out this extra corner that's on the field? How is that going to create a mismatch for me? And then from a dynasty roster construction perspective, I think, that is introducing more bigger pass catching options. I think Kincaid is a good example. We're going to see that with Sam Laporta. The Lions offense is another one that kind of fits into one of those weird categories, but there's just a ton of different ways that I think the NFL offense is evolving. And honestly, each one is a different brand. So it's kind of impacting the way we are drafting in Dynasty, and what kind of values we're able to find because of those roster construction things that NFL teams are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a point you want to make? Sorry, man. I feel like
No,
I
I'm
cut
sorry.
you
Go
off.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. And so I think that what we've traditionally seen, we've seen NFL offenses go to three wide receiver sets over the last 2 decades or so, and then you're kind of seeing migration away from that. And so even when you were in three wide receiver sets, like we had some of these offenses, and the Bengals now are a prime example of it, where you have three legitimate receiving options. Now, some of these offenses, in Philadelphia is one where they're putting Quez Watkins out there. He's kind of more window dressing, and he is kind of there to take the top off of defenses. And kind of what that does is it almost treats him like a fullback, where you're sending the defense deep, you're pulling defenders away from the play action there, you're allowing the creation of space. Just like a fullback would traditionally kind of erase a defender, that deep wide receiver, that extra guy can erase a wide receiver. And so to marry that over to what the Bills do with Gabe Davis, having Gabe Davis on the field, using him as that deep vertical threat, but Gabe Davis is also a strong run blocker. And so what that does is it allows the Bills to go either direction on the play action, and whatever way they want to move, either run towards Gabe Davis, use him as a point of attack defender, or kind of use him as that extra guy to send deep into erase defenders. And so it's really, when you boil it down to NFL offenses and where the fantasy application comes in, is you're kind of want to get 2 to 3 major main playmakers and get them the ball as frequently as you can. One, because of allocation of resources, it's expensive to have those players on your roster, especially when they're wide receivers. Two, they require high draft capital usually, and so you only have so much high draft capital. But three, there's only one ball to go around, and as much as you want to have extra guys, having guys like a Kyle Juszczyk is the guy that I know you're high on. The ability to create different conflicts and be able to use players in different ways while still having a base set.
Man, we'll get into Kyle Juszczyk in a bit, but before we move on, make sure you take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Comment below with your questions, trades. We have a trade segment on the show, and we'd love to use your trades that you drop in the comments. So make sure you like, subscribe, and drop your comments on the topic.
Yeah, also make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a premium subscriber. Elite subscribers get custom Dynasty content for less than $15 monthly or $70 annually. Everyone who purchases a Football Guys subscription has 30 days from the date of purchase to request their money back if they are unsatisfied, but you will not be. Join today.
All right. So the meat of this show is going to be diving into each position and talking about, what types of evolutions are impacting how we look at these positions in Dynasty. And the first one that I want to talk about, obviously, will be the quarterback position. That's the thing that drives the NFL. And I think that this is a good starting point because there is so much evolution in terms of when you look at 10 years ago, a decade ago, the Tom Brady's of the world, the Drew Brees of the world were dominating. Philip Rivers, that was the blueprint for your quarterback, right? Now we're looking at Lamar Jackson getting paid, Jalen Hurts getting paid, Justin Fields getting, more MVP votes than Patrick Mahomes, apparently, which is an insane premise, by the way. But, um, so Jeff, talk to me about the evolution of NFL offenses, how that pertains to quarterbacks, what that means for Dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real on some of this, because there are guys getting the opportunity to play quarterback that 10, 15, 20 years ago never would have gotten the opportunity to play quarterback. One, because NFL teams tried so hard to put what an NFL quarterback is into a box, and they wanted that big, strong arm quarterback. A lot of what they did was power run game with two wide receivers out wide, cornerbacks up on them playing bump and run, and quarterbacks being forced to throw it into a tight window again with a physical wide receiver kind of fighting off a defender. And that's outside of some of the things that Bill Walsh did with the West Coast offense, and some of the more evolved offenses, Mike Martz with the Greatest Show on Turf, those types of things. That's what a lot of what they were looking for. And so as those athletes have gotten a better opportunity to play quarterback, that's bubbled up offensive concepts that really have come from the college game, and kind of the way that the spread has been able to utilize. And so Urban Meyer, and I know Urban Meyer gets all this heat because he really failed last year with the Jaguars, but he was a big innovator in terms of the quarterback run. If you remember back to Tim Tebow when he was with Florida, and Braxton Miller at Ohio State, where Urban emphasized the value in a quarterback run because of the numbers matchup, because unaccounted for defender, and the ability to create a mathematical problem. And so that's where a lot of this came from.
Yeah. And so I wanted to highlight Corey Spala's article again. We talked about it in the podcast segment of this show last week, but we talked about how quarterback running ability has kind of evolved the rushing attack as well. You look at rushing attempts finally went up last year after a long drought of not being the king, or just not increasing ever. They increased last year, and pass attempts came down. And a lot of that is because we have a lot more quarterbacks that are taking advantage of those matchups. They are taking advantage of the fact that, they do have this insane athlete at quarterback. And so now they can do different creative things in their rushing attack. Now, I do want to mention that this is very much so an element of that spread offense that we talked about. Philadelphia is doing that. We mentioned them. I think that was one of the changes in the Bears offense last year that allowed Justin Fields to kind of take off. I think, the Luke Getsy offense is traditionally more Shanahan inspired, and I think we'll see a little bit more of that this year. But when Justin Fields had that long stretch of really good fantasy finishes, it was on the back of his rushing output. And they put him in the shotgun and they said, all right, we're going to run some read options, RPOs. We're going to get you in space and we're going to allow you to be the best player on the field. And I think that's the main difference here, right? Is that offense can absolutely have a quarterback be the most dynamic athlete on the field, but also potentially the best player. That doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be the best passer. We'll talk about some dynasty values in a little bit. But I just wanted to highlight these things. So difference between a QB1 and a QB2 on average over the last 3 years is about 110 points. And the average rushing yards discrepancy between a QB1 and a QB2 is 150 yards a year. So what we have seen in Dynasty, and this isn't news, right? Everyone kind of knows that a quarterback should have a rushing floor at this point, but that is so crucial to building a competitive Dynasty roster. When I'm drafting, I'm going out and I have to get a quarterback that I think is gonna, put up at least 300 yards on the ground, right? The guys on the other side of things. So like the Brock Purdy of the world, right? The Brock Purdy that is the perfect Shanahan quarterback. He's gonna get you a nice floor of like QB 18 on a year, and that might be safe for dynasty rosters. But I am always attacking those guys that can give me 3-4 points a week additionally with their rushing attack. And so I think that's where this conversation leads us, right? Is that are you one of those people that has to go get one of those rushing quarterbacks, or are you someone that would be comfortable with like a Kirk Cousins or a Brock Purdy, like I said, as your QB2 if you've gone out to get one of those other guys?
I think we've played in enough leagues and you know me well enough to know the answer on that one. I'm going for those elite guys, especially right now. You look at redraft valuation, the ability to get a Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts in round 3, or Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence a little bit lower. And really my bottom end of where I want to walk out of a draft would be Deshaun Watson. I think we both believe that there's going to be a bounce back there in Cleveland for him this year. But just that upside is so high. You've got these guys that can give you they're averaging 25 points per game, whereas that low end quarterback two is more about 17 points per game. And I've written about quite a bit about the advantage that as you start to stack these things, if you're to grab Travis Kelsey and one of these elite quarterbacks, you're essentially putting an extra wide receiver or running back into your lineup because of the differentiation. And if football guys is founded on value based drafting is something that goes back is in our blood at football guys, and value based drafting, that ability to look for those differentiators at each position to create edges and to bubble up. And so the elite quarterback does that. But I do think that there's value because I think that within fantasy, and people hear RPO and they hear that, but foundationally, what an RPO does is it creates conflict where, and a lot of the reason why this has happened, one, it's been allowed to happen because of the athleticism at quarterback, but two, we've seen these amazing pass rushers enter the NFL, and these guys are fantastic. We can go back and kind of TJ Watt, whoever you might want to name, Michael Parsons. I mean, these guys. And so what an RPO action does, and I don't know if it was Urban, but I read a great story about one of the originators of the RPO. What it does is you've got this guy that your tackle can't block. And so for years and years and years, when you're standing in the pocket, you would have to chip him, you would have to put tight end over there, you'd have to put extra attention over there. What the RPO concept does is basically say, we're not even going to block this guy. We're going to put him in conflict. We're going to make him make the choice. If he reads that running back, that quarterback is going to pull that ball out. That running back is going to go up. He's going to get tackled by that defensive end, and the quarterback is out the other side. If it goes the other way, that running back takes it and he's getting a quick gain. Now, where RPO plays into it is usually like a power slant, and think AJ Brown working across the middle at a power slant and kind of working in behind those linebackers as they are brought up into the run action. You're bringing those guys up. You're creating a pocket where you're able to quickly get your creator the ball down the field and allow him to create after the catch. And so all of that marries together, and that's how the offensive movement works together. And so it's happening very, very quickly because these are synchronized movements. They are reading keys, just going way back to Nebraska's triple option. You would have different defenders that you would read, and whatever they do, that kind of makes the decision for you. And so that has simplified decision making for quarterbacks and created opportunities where they are able to create.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I would love to talk about the quarterback position for even longer, but I do think we should move over to the running back position because I think, we had a whole show about vulnerable running back assets in Dynasty last week. So go check that out if you haven't already. But the running back position is a hot topic right now. We're talking about the value of running backs and what is valuable. And in Dynasty, I think a lot of people are wondering, like, where can I attack value? Because even the Jonathan Taylors of the world now don't seem to hold value as well. I saw a list. It was Breece Hall, Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor at the top of the Dynasty list, which I think was correct at the time. And all of those guys have fallen quite a bit. So talk to me about the evolution of the running back position, Jeff. Where is this position going? And then what are we doing for Dynasty?
Yeah, so there's a finite amount of plays that can be run. And that's what I think that people need to realize. And if you're going to give your runs to quarterbacks for years and years and years, it seemed like everything was headed into a committee direction with the backfield. But if your quarterback is eating a significant amount of that rushing, and you look at Philadelphia ran the ball more than any team in the NFL last year. Jalen Hurts had about 165 of those rush attempts. So teams like Detroit was in the middle in terms of rushing, but Jared Goff didn't run at all. And Detroit's running backs outrushed Philadelphia's running backs by a significant margin. I believe it's about 80 carries or so. And you look at Dallas, they ran the ball just about as much as Philadelphia, but because Dak Prescott didn't have that involvement, the running backs ran the ball 100 times more than the Philadelphia running backs did, even though Philadelphia ran the ball more. And so having those rushing quarterbacks takes that off the plate from that running back, and it essentially creates part of the committee, one of the heads of the committee. That allows you to have one elite playmaker. And so looking at a player like James Cook is a player that I'm very high on this year. And a lot of the pushback that I'm seeing is, well, the Bills need to have that traditional ball carrier with Damian Harris and grinding out yards. And that's simply not how NFL offenses work, because Josh Allen's going to be eating a significant amount of that rushing pie. If James Cook slices off a good amount of that rushing pie, there's not a lot left for another back to go there. And so having those guys that can create in the passing game and become versatile offensive weapons allows you to have that flexibility built into offenses.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and you highlight James Cook. I think we've seen this quite a bit with Alvin Kamara is the one that comes to mind as, I think Sean Payton was ahead of the curve a little bit there. Obviously, he's not the first running back to catch a ton of passes. That's not the only thing that kind of identifies this, but I think what we're going to see is Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, both are being valued as top 3 to 5 assets in most dynasty lists, and I think they're both inside our top 5 at football guys. But that's not because they're going to go eat up, 350 carries a year and be, 20 carry a game guys and get you points that way. I think that era is gone. No matter the system, whether it's the Shanahan system that does want to run the ball 35 to 40 times a game, or whether it's this, spread it out, run 11 personnel a ton, but then get creative with your wide receiver blocking concepts to get, mismatches in the rushing attack as well. It doesn't matter because the Shanahan offense is now going to take Christian McCaffrey and play him on 55% of snaps because, we've got a guy named Jordan Mason that even when Elijah Mitchell's hurt, we can throw Jordan Mason in there. Or we've got a guy like Deebo Samuel that we can have eat some carries because we are so creative with how we have constructed this rushing attack. And so then you talk about, okay, well then what are you looking for in a dynasty running back? You're looking for a guy that can go down the field and catch passes. I think even the era of dump off running backs is kind of out of style, or is slowly inching out of style. I think you've seen the most I've seen from Bijan Robinson this training camp has been him running routes downfield, cooking linebackers. Yeah, I saw one today where he beat a corner as well. And so that's the type of guy that NFL teams will invest in. I think that's a big reason why Jonathan Taylor is not getting his way with this contract situation. Is we don't have proof that Jonathan Taylor can do that, but I do have hard proof that these two rookies can run down the field and beat actual NFL players when they are more than, -2 yards down the field. So I think that's something that we're going to see a shift to. There aren't too many guys that fit that mold right now. I think, in 3 years, we're going to be talking about the running back position a lot differently.
Yeah, and that's a key part. As these passing concepts grow, you're going to have running backs that have built and developed those tools much earlier. We're already seeing it with wide receivers, where that development curve has really been erased because of the concepts that are being run in college. That's going to happen as well. And so, and this all works into the marriage of what you're trying to do to create conflict with the defense, where if you've got these running backs that can attack vertically down the field, you're freezing linebackers, because if the linebacker is going to crash on that RPO action, you're shooting that running back out right behind them on a wheel route, and you're attacking downfield. The entire defense, all you need in the NFL is that little sliver, and we see it so often on Sundays where that little sliver, you get the ball in the right guy's hands, all of a sudden that's a 35-yard play, and creating explosive plays is what NFL offenses are trying to do, and the ability to score, the frequency of scoring goes up dramatically when one of those are created in a drive. And so this concept, this idea that I think that some people still kind of think what an NFL offense is trying to do, or what offense in general is trying to do, is grind out yards and control the ball, and that's simply not the not happening in the NFL, because the ability of defenders on the other side to create defensive explosive plays, to create an interception, a turnover, a sack, and sacks in the NFL especially really just kill the drives. And so having those running backs that can create that conflict, that can freeze those linebackers, attack downfield vertically, and that's what teams are going to invest in. And so the edge that you can gain in Dynasty is to target those guys like a James Cook that people are going to fade because they don't fit that traditional 220-pound running back mold. Well, we're smart enough to know that we can see with Austin Eckler what he's been able to do, and probably what Tony Pollard this year. And so you're going to see these lighter backs that get more creative usage. We know that Scott Barrett has done a lot of really good work, and Corey mentioned in his article as well the value of a target versus the value of a touch. And as you see more running back targets, that increases the scoring ability. And Alvin Kamara is a great example that you brought up, looking back historically when he really got involved, how much he was able to score just off those targets.
Yeah, for sure. I think you mentioned explosive plays. Just a parting note on running backs. The Shanahan offense also isn't trying to eat the clock, by the way. He is trying to create explosives with that running attack. I think you look at Mike McDaniel as someone who is really, really creative in doing those things. Teams are looking for big plays, scoring a lot of points very quickly. That is always going to be the case moving forward. We kind of know that it's an offensive minded league. And so that's just what I want to leave here, because I think, you know, Zeke's role from Dallas, I don't think we're going to see too much of that anymore.
Yeah, and a quarterback does a lot of that. But before we continue, we want to tell you about our strategy session giveaway. The three of us, Kevin is not with us tonight, as you can tell, but he's got a big family move going on. We're so excited for him. But the three of us are committed to helping you win your Dynasty League and are giving away live strategy sessions to 3 lucky listeners. We'll sit down in a video chat and analyze how we'd approach your Dynasty roster. All you have to do is leave a review for the podcast, take a screenshot of the review, and email it to Coleman@footballguys.com and send him your well wishes, because there's exciting news in the Coleman family.
Yeah. Yeah. And he will be checking those emails. Don't worry. Okay. Let's get into wide receivers. So we talked a little bit about, 12 personnel and how teams are trying. We're starting to see the trend to go bigger on offense because defenses have gone smaller. What does that mean for wide receivers? Does that just devalue the wide receiver position, Jeff, or do you think that this is going to actually help the top end of dynasty wide receivers?
Well, I think the most interesting cases with wide receivers, you look at Miami, you look at Philadelphia, you look at San Francisco. That what these teams have is they have 2 wide receivers, and they are hyper funneling targets to those 2 wide receivers. And we started the show talking about allocation of assets, and wide receivers outside of quarterback is the most expensive position now on an NFL field. And so many of those impact receivers are first round picks usually, or going early in the draft. And so you're allocating resources on 2 ends. And so by hyper targeting those players, one, you're putting the ball in the best player's hands, but 2, how that trickles down for fantasy is you see, like the Miami situation, where you've got 2 wide receivers capable of being wide receiver ones on the season. And so as that starts to consolidate, as that starts to flow down, as you get less 3 wide receiver sets, as you get targets more consolidated, you're kind of creating a situation where you're allowing to have more higher end wide receiver potential options. And you look around the league, there's 32 teams in the league. You can do the math. 32 teams, multiply that by 2. If every team has 2 top options, suddenly 64 wide receivers that you're really looking at. Well, think about your dynasty roster. You're starting probably 3 wide receivers, maybe 2 flex positions, but there might be a kicker on there where the tight end premium increases. And as a tight end becomes more that main receiver, you might want to consider more tight ends. You're all of a sudden sitting, you can do that math pretty quickly, where if you're in a 12 team league and you've got 5 potential starting wide receivers, I mean, you're right there at 60. And so you're kind of right at that number. And so the surplus or the lack of wide receivers, I think, are going to flow out a little bit.
Yeah. I did want to mention, so the Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, a combination of 287 targets. Like, this was an insane target share last year. But so they were based in 12 personnel. They used Durham Smythe a lot. They used Mike Gesicki a lot. They put the best players on the field. I think that was their best combination, with Mike Gesicki being another option. The Eagles, on the other hand, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, 282 targets combined, and they were very, very heavy into 11 personnel. And the reason I want to bring this up is because the reason that AJ Brown and Devontae Smith were able to be, on the field so much, getting those amounts of targets, is exactly what Jeff said earlier in the show, where Quez Watkins was a guy that he was very much so a decoy, a distraction player. Sure, he got his fair share of targets, and obviously, Dallas Goedert got his fair share of targets, and it wasn't like there weren't targets to go around for those guys. However, the reason that Brown and Smith were able to get those is because that offense was so efficient in the rushing attack. It was so efficient with their RPOs that it, AJ Brown and Devontae Smith are always wide open. That scheme kind of allowed for them to be open. I'm not saying that they can't get open on their own. I'm saying that when you combine great players with great scheme, that's what you're going to get. I think the same is true of the 12 personnel base with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, where I like Tua. I think he's a good quarterback. I also think that there were a lot of times where Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill were wide open because of what Mike McDaniel did. And so good play callers know how to get their best 2 to 3 players the ball, because those best 2 to 3 players are their best chance at winning a football game, at winning multiple football games. And so I did want to bring that up because that's not necessarily just a 12 personnel trend. It's very much so an NFL trend where it's, across the league. I think Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, there are a lot of different examples of this. And it's something that I think we should pay attention to for dynasty roster construction.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned right there at the end talking about Cincinnati. And so Cincinnati, kind of they're more the traditional, that Sean McVay, Zach Taylor is a kind of flows down from that. And if you think back to the Rams, back when they had Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and Brandon Cooks, what they wanted to do originally, they wanted to be a heavier 12 personnel team, but because they had that depth at wide receiver, they said, we're going to put our best players on the field. And I think that you're seeing some of that in Cincinnati as well, where Tyler Boyd is much better than any of the other options that they could potentially put out there. So Tyler Boyd is going to be playing a lot. Well, Tyler Boyd he's got an impending free agency coming up. And because of the resources that the team is going to have to allocate to Joe Burrow, to T. Higgins, and then to Jamar Chase, I don't know if Tyler Boyd is long for the Bengals. And so the Bengals might be a team there where I think we all know the upside of T. Higgins and when Jamar Chase has been out of the lineup, what he's been able to do. But I think the consistency hasn't really been there. And I think some people devalue him as a premium dynasty wide receiver. But a lot of that's because Tyler Boyd is siphoning off those targets. Well, Tyler Boyd is no longer on the team. As they shift that to, a Kyle Juszczyk type or an Alec Ingold, or if they have Ben Skoranek or somebody like that is doing more of those window dressing, more of those protection type things, then you've got less targets that are getting allocated to Tyler Boyd, and you're getting that tighter target tree that you really want to see. And so I think that Cincinnati is one to watch out for the future, and T. Higgins might be a great value buy.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we have to get to tight ends, and I know this is one of your favorite ones to talk about. We've mentioned them quite a bit, and what their impact has been on NFL roster construction. But I do want to ask the driving question here. So you've got multiple teams that are investing in this 12 personnel, right? We listed quite a few. I think even the Jaguars with Evan Ingram and the Brenton Strange that they brought in. They're that's a trend among a lot of NFL teams. Does that impact the upside of one of those tight ends? For example, let's use the Bills and Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. Dawson Knox got a ton of money. The Bills drafted Dalton Kincaid. Does Dawson Knox then eat into Kincaid's workload or target share? Like you said, there's one ball to go around. Or is Kincaid drafted so that Knox can be used in a more feasible role, I guess, compared to what I think they thought he was?
So if you look at the Bills specifically, when Cole Beasley was there with Dawson Knox, with Gabe Davis, there's about a 23% target share in that offense that went to that slot wide receiver position. That is a lot for a tight end to eat. And there's plenty of room for Dalton Kincaid to eat there. And so they're going to play 12 personnel. They're talking about it being 11 and a half personnel. That's what they've deemed it. And Dalton Kincaid is that big slot receiver. And so what that does, and especially if you're in a tight end premium league, what you can see out of this and why you should probably be targeting these guys like Dalton Kincaid, like Greg Dulcich is an option, maybe Pat Freiermuth in Pittsburgh with the addition of Darnell Washington. They're bringing in these guys that maybe traditionally would have been a fullback. Now they can play online tight end, have that ability to play tight end and to do a lot of that dirty work. They're getting these versatile guys that can play fullback, tight end, whatever it might be. and then they're creating a big slot position. And so they're trying to catch defenses being in that nickel, have a lot more power, and then they're creating a primary receiver that so going way back when I wrote my Greg Dulcich spotlight on the Sean Payton offense, Marcus Colston, a player 20 years ago, was a tight end in college, and Sean Payton transitioned him to be his big slot wide receiver. And we saw how great Marcus Colston was in fantasy. Well, if you're in a tight end premium league and that position is getting that volume, all of a sudden you're going to have a massive advantage at the tight end position, but you're probably going to start putting those guys at the flex position as well. And so if you can move quickly right now, grab those guys, consolidate those assets within your league, you're setting yourself up very, very well to one, have trade potential options down the line as people that didn't see this coming because they didn't listen to our show or they didn't listen to us in general, or two, they don't have that differentiation, but then you have that depth on your roster and you have those assets.
Yeah. Yeah, the tight end position is creating mismatches. It's creating versatility, right? So you mentioned it. You throw a big slot out there. Well, we talk about the impact in the passing game and what that means maybe for the tight end position in Dynasty. What that really is doing as well is creating this insane advantage in the rushing attack.
Yes.
And so I've been leaning into the rushing attack is on its way back. This is a cyclical league. We are going to see some influx of rushing. What that looks like is going to be very different. We just talked about that as well. But I looked at the 49ers specifically because I knew once Brock Purdy came in, they went heavier personnel, but I wasn't sure. So I went and I charted 3 games. And weeks 13 through 15, San Francisco ran 49% 21 personnel. 21 personnel would be 2 running backs, 1 tight end, and then 2 wide receivers. So what they're doing in that situation would be they're using Kyle Juszczyk as, oh, he's our tight end now. Oh, he's our slot receiver now. Oh, we're going to move him into the backfield. We're going to get really creative with this one player. Then they brought in, 12% of 12 personnel. So they were running heavy sets on over 60% of their plays, and they were one of the most efficient offenses in the NFL with Brock Purdy at quarterback. And so it's hard to do. And so when you look at that, you look at what kind of mismatches the tight end or the fullback position or a hybrid of the two can create. And that's where I think we're leaning. I think that's where a lot of these teams are drafting. So it's an exciting time to be a fan of the tight end position. I will say that.
Yeah, and a lot of it is you're getting, because of the passing game is trickling down to lower levels, you're getting bigger, more athletic players who have those ball skills. And that's where a lot of the influx of why a lot of these guys are younger is because historically they might have played a different position or they just might have never had that involvement to develop those ball skills. And now they've got it. And so it's just, you're exactly right. I love this position, and I think that where NFL offenses are headed is going to be very interesting. And if you are out in front of it, you can get a big advantage in your dynasty league.
Absolutely. That'll do it for the evolution of NFL offenses. Please remember that the full version of every show can be found on your favorite podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. If you're enjoying the show, make sure you go subscribe to the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show. You can type that in your little search bar there and make sure you subscribe. Leave us a review and then send it to us, and you could be entered into that strategy session giveaway.